The defense of the Pokrovsk Manorat agglomeration continues. There is no encirclement of Ukrainian armed forces units. This was stated by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. They emphasized that just in the past day, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated 26 Russian occupiers in the Pokrovsk area. Another 64 invaders were wounded. 58 enemy infantry shelters in the city and its surroundings were destroyed or damaged. The Dobropillia operation is also ongoing. Over the past day, Ukrainian assault units advanced nearly a kilometer in certain directions. Measures are being taken to block the enemy, who is trying to infiltrate and amass forces in Pokrovsk. Active resistance is underway against attempts by groups of Russian infantry to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk. Ukrainian defense forces are conducting strike and search operations. In particular, assault units of the 425th Separate Assault Regiment have been deployed, along with operators from unmanned systems forces, special operations groups from the National Guard and the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, as well as reinforced military units holding the city's defense. From a statement by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook, just in the Pokrovsk direction alone, since the beginning of the day, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled nearly half of all recorded Russian attacks on the front. The General Staff notes that the armed forces of Ukraine are steadfastly holding back the enemy's onslaught.
In recent weeks, the defense forces of Ukraine have liberated 4 settlements in this section of the front, including Shakov and, accordingly, the settlements of Sekidsk, Zadyshek, and Kucherivia. As we can see, these are significant tactical successes by Ukraine's defense forces, which essentially put an end to the hysteria in Russian media about the supposedly catastrophic situation of Ukraine's defense forces in the Pokrovsk direction.
The number of Russian assaults has also increased in the Kostantinivka, Oleksandrivka, and Lyman directions. And on the Kupyansk bridgehead, according to Ukrainian soldiers, Russian occupiers are trying to cross the Oskil River. But UAV operators are keeping the situation under control here, destroying all enemy boats and leaving the Russian occupiers not the slightest chance to get to the right bank. Analyzing the situation in the Kupyansk direction, military experts claim that the Ukrainian armed forces are stabilizing the situation there.
Our defense forces are acting very pragmatically on this section of the front right now. Not only using their own forces and resources to eliminate Russian assault troops who have infiltrated the Kupyansk area, but they are also taking measures to destroy pontoon crossings over the Oskil River north of Kupyansk. They are carrying out operations to destroy key logistical routes that run along not only the eastern, but also the western bank of this river. And in general, I believe that this activity is gradually yielding results.
Ukrainian border guards deliberately blew up the Russian long-range surveillance system Moromim in a Vovchansk direction. According to Ukrainian soldiers, along with the system, UAV operators and artillerymen also destroyed enemy vehicles, communication systems, and drone launch positions.
You're fighting. Woika remains in his position.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces, total Russian combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have now surpassed 1,147,000 soldiers. Yesterday, 6 Russian armored combat vehicles, 15 artillery systems, and 172 operational tactical level UAVs were also destroyed. And 84 units of automotive equipment. And
there were 276 clashes on the front lines over the past day. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the hottest spot is the Pokrovsk direction. There alone, Russian troops attempted 100 assaults on the positions of the defense forces. On the Alexandrovsk front, Ukrainian defenders repelled 31 attacks. In the Konstantinovsk direction, 35. In the area of Kupyansk, Kharkiv region, Kremlin occupation forces launched 7 assaults. In the southern Slobozansky direction, particularly in the area of Vovchansk, Ukrainian defense forces stopped 14 offensives.
soldiers of the 425th Separate Assault Regiment of SKI cleared the city council building in Pokrovsk, Donetsk region, of Russian invaders and returned the Ukrainian flag to it. The soldiers said that the combat operation was divided into several stages. First, they established a logistics route, and then 2 assault brigades completed the combat mission. Ukrainian defenders refuted all Russian propaganda claims about the city being taken and emphasized that Pokrovsk remains under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine.
Recently, the enemy has been spreading information that Pokrovsk is completely under their control, as well as claims that at the city council in the settlement of Pokrovsk, they raised their rag, let's put it that way, their flag. But this information we
have refuted. Pavel, good morning to you, and glory to Ukraine. I hope you are having a wonderful start to your day. Wishing you strength and courage as always, and once again, glory to Ukraine.
Greetings.
Glory to the heroes. Good morning.
Based on these latest reports, it seems that fighting is still ongoing inside Pokrovsk. To say that there is some specific situation there right now and that we can draw any conclusions, I think it's probably still too early. Pavel, how would you assess what is happening there now and the prospects?
The situation in the entire Pokrovsk-Murmansk agglomeration is indeed complicated. And probably to the north of Pokrovsk as well. We need to take into account this Dobropillia salient. It's very complex and ambiguous. And that's understandable because on both our side and the enemy's, most of the forces involved in the entire battle in eastern Ukraine are concentrated there. The concentration of forces is enormous. Drones are used on average 5 times more here than along the rest of the front line, meaning compared to other hot spots. You can imagine the intensity of the fighting. Russia isn't sending assault groups into the city, and this has required our command to also deploy special forces units. The combat tactics being used are exactly those imposed by the Russians, which involve fighting with small, but tightly coordinated and interconnected units. The outcome largely depends on who is better informed and aware of the situation on the battlefield. But it's important to understand that Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk-Murmansk agglomeration, is now also a political objective for Putin. And the survival of Gerasimov, who has already promised Putin both the capture and the encirclement of Pokrovsk. None of that has happened, so the Chief of the General Staff and the Minister of Defense will throw all possible forces at Pokrovsk. But at the same time, they're trying to stretch our defenses, deprive us of reserves, operational reserves that could turn the situation around in this sector of the front, in this key area.
Pavel, tell us, in your opinion, what does your analysis show and what is the possible development of the situation around Kupyansk? Just 2 days ago, the president spoke about this and said that the operation to clear the settlement of those representatives of the Russian Federation's army who managed to break through into it is ongoing and must continue.
In terms of battle tactics, the situation is very similar to what's happening in the Pokrovsk direction. On the Kupyansk section of the front, well, obviously, this is a new trend, and we'll have to adapt to it and find new tactical approaches. Our command is finding them. If in the Pokrovsk direction the enemy has a manpower advantage by several orders of magnitude, then in the Kupyansk direction the situation is somewhat easier. Naturally, we're talking about encirclement. But there's no talk of encircling Kupyansk, just like Pokrovsk, because the Russians' plan was to envelop from the north, break through the river from the south, cut off a large group of Ukrainian troops, eliminate them, and create a gap in our defenses. That's what they wanted, but they didn't succeed, so the assault continues. with infiltration in this way. From the north into the city, but Ukraine's defense forces are acting actively, both in Kupyansk itself and to its north. To say that, right now we'll drive the Russians out of the city, that's obviously way too optimistic. Take Kupyansk, for example. By the way, today, yesterday, and the day before were very intense days there. There, even though the dam was blown up, which you'd think should have made things easier, cut up and disrupt the enemy's logistics, and help liberate the city. But it's much harder to drive out an enemy that's already managed to dig in than to prevent them from doing so in the first place.
Pavel, let's clarify a bit for our viewers about this dam. Why am I bringing this up? We've seen a lot of hysterical statements, even accusations, coming from the occupiers. We're talking, as I understand it, about the dam at the Belgorod Reservoir, which is located on the Stary Oskol River. Basically, the main idea there was to raise the water level of the river. This made things easier for Ukraine's defense forces. As for the civilian population, as I understand it, the scale wasn't such that it posed any real threat. Let's explain this point about the dam as well.
Well, first of all, this isn't the Kakhovka Reservoir, it's not the Kakhovka Dam. Moreover, Ukraine's defense forces struck one of the sluices in order to cause a controlled flooding. The idea boils down to this. Basically, instead of relying on rain to flood the roads and complicate the enemy's logistics. Overall, this worked because there was a buildup of forces there and more active operations were expected. Russia was expected to launch an offensive operation. Well, basically, judging by the intensity of the fighting in that area, that's how it is. Yesterday, today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, just look, it's obvious. These preemptive actions were both forced and necessary. On the other hand, you also have to understand that it's harder to defend in these muddy conditions, but attacking isn't really an option either. So, it's a way to drag out the confrontation over time and make things easier for our forces here and now.
Pavel, tell us, how do you assess this? And what are the objectives, if we're talking about the strategic plans and their implementation by the armed forces of Ukraine? The recent long-range strikes that have targeted energy infrastructure are timed not only to supporting the defense industry, but also to a specific region of the Russian Federation. Most recently, we saw the Kostroma GRES, and before that, there was the energy infrastructure in the Vladimir region, in the city of Orel. We saw certain explosions. So, Pavel, what is all this supposed to lead to? Obviously, with, let's say, fairly frequent actions aimed at cutting off power to various facilities in the Russian Federation.
I might be wrong, but from my point of view, as we've already discussed, the Ukrainian armed forces have two main objectives with these strikes deep into Russian territory. The first is to destroy their military-industrial complex, to weaken the Russian army, its logistics, and its rear support. The second is our so-called kinetic or combat sanctions against the Russian. Well, fleet and oil transfer infrastructure, which are meant to weaken the flow of those bloody petrodollars that fund the Russian army. Now, the strikes on the energy sector last night, by the way, were also quite significant. That's a slightly different story. That story is about how this is an adequate response to Russian strikes, to Russia's attempts to plunge Ukraine into a blackout. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, warned Putin that this is not 2022, so don't even try. To freeze Ukrainians, we will respond appropriately. And a strategy of deterrence only works when words are backed up by actions. And here, there's a separate cluster of measures meant to demonstrate and stop Putin and his gang from striking our energy sector and terrorizing the civilian population.
Yes, Pavel, that's right. There won't be a repeat of what happened in 2022, no matter what they were counting on. And the Putin regime, along with all its cronies, lackeys, and flunkies of the Kremlin and Putin's regime, need to understand that this is really a two-way street, with 2 lanes for movement. And there will be consequences accordingly. Thank you for the conversation. We appreciate you joining us. Pavel, you're always welcome here. You are a friend of the Freedom Channel. Pavlo Lakiichuk, Head of Military Security Programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy for the 21st Century, was with us live.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.